It was a quiet afternoon on the edge of town, the kind of day when nothing unusual ever seemed to happen. The sun hung low, warming the road as a gentle breeze brushed over the trees that lined the highway. Officer Daniels sat behind the wheel of his patrol car, sipping from his lukewarm coffee and humming softly to a tune on the radio. His shift had been slow, just a few minor stops, a broken tail light, a forgotten seatbelt. Nothing out of the ordinary. He had been doing this job for nearly 15 years, and most days followed the same rhythm. Check traffic, watch the road, keep people safe. He liked the calmness of it, the sense of quiet order that came with patrol duty. But even in his experience, he knew one thing for sure. A quiet day could change in a heartbeat. The moment came when a blue sedan passed by. It wasn't speeding. It wasn't loud. But something about it caught his eye. Maybe it was the way the driver gripped the wheel too tightly, or how the car drifted just slightly within its lane. Daniels couldn't explain it, but something felt off. He watched it for a few more seconds before flicking on his lights. The flashing red and blue reflected against the car's back window. The driver hesitated for a moment, then slowly pulled to the side of the road. Daniels sighed, grabbed his notepad, and stepped out of his car. The gravel crunched under his boots as he approached. The air smelled faintly of gasoline and dust. Just a regular stop, he told himself. But the moment he came closer, he noticed something that made him pause. Through the dusty back window, he saw movement. Small, quiet movement. A child, a little girl, sitting in the back seat. Her face was pale, and she stared straight ahead, not even glancing toward the officer approaching the car. For a second, their eyes met through the glass. It wasn't just fear in her expression, and it was something deeper. Something that made his chest tighten. He shook off the uneasy feeling and walked up to the driver's side. The man behind the wheel looked to be in his mid-40s. His hair was unkempt, his shirt wrinkled, and his hands trembled slightly as he reached for his wallet. "Good afternoon, sir," Daniels said calmly. "Mind if I see your license and registration?" The man nodded quickly. "Of course, officer. No problem." His voice was polite, but his tone was too quick, too rehearsed. Daniels watched closely as the man handed over the documents. His eyes darted between the mirror and the road ahead, as if afraid to look the officer directly in the face. Daniels glanced at the registration and license. Everything seemed fine on paper, but something about the man's behavior, the shaking hands, the nervous eyes, made his instincts stir. He leaned slightly, pretending to glance at the car's dashboard. "You heading somewhere specific today?" he asked casually. The man hesitated. "Just visiting family?" he replied. Daniels noticed the pause. It was just long enough to sound uncertain. "Whereabouts?" he asked, still keeping his voice easy. Out near Riverton," the man said, looking away. Daniels nodded slowly, pretending to jot something down in his notepad. Riverton was over 80 miles in the opposite direction of where the car had come from. He didn't point it out. Not yet. Instead, he looked again toward the back seat. The girl still hadn't moved. She was clutching something, a small, worn-out teddy bear with one ear missing. Her fingers were tightly wrapped around it, almost as if it was the only thing she trusted in that moment. "Is that your daughter?" Daniels asked, trying to keep his tone friendly. The man hesitated, then nodded quickly. "Yes, my daughter. We're just going to see her grandmother." Daniel smiled politely, but inside his stomach turned. Something wasn't right. He crouched slightly, lowering himself to the girl's eye level. "Hi there," he said softly. "You okay, sweetheart?" The girl's lips parted, but she didn't speak. Her eyes shifted toward the man in the front seat, then back to Daniels. It was quick, but the message was clear. She was scared. Daniels stood up, his mind now racing. He had handled all sorts of traffic stops before, drunks, runaways, stolen cars. But this was different. There was a quiet tension in the air, something he couldn't quite put into words. He decided to stall a bit to observe more before making any assumptions. "Sir," he said calmly, "mind stepping out of the vehicle for a quick chat?" The man froze. "Is there a problem, officer?" "Nothing serious," Daniel said, forcing a smile. "Just routine." After a moment, the man reluctantly opened his door and stepped out. He kept glancing back toward the car, his shoulders stiff, his breathing uneven. Daniels guided him a few steps away from the car. "You seem a bit nervous," he said. "Everything okay?" The man gave a short laugh that didn't sound real. "Yeah, just tired." Been driving all day. Daniels nodded. I get that. Long drives can wear you out. He paused, then asked lightly, mind if I ask your daughter a quick question? Just to make sure she's comfortable back there. The man's reaction was immediate. She's fine, he said quickly. She's just shy around strangers. That was the first real red flag. Daniel's pulse quickened. He forced a calm expression, hiding the growing unease that twisted in his chest. At that moment, another patrol car pulled up behind his. His partner, Officer Lee, stepped out. She had been covering the nearby area and noticed the lights. Daniels waved her over, giving her a subtle look that said, something's off. Lee walked toward the passenger side of the blue sedan while Daniels kept the man occupied. She knelt down slightly and peered through the open window. Hey there, she said in a gentle voice. What's your name? The girl didn't answer. Her small hands trembled as she clutched the teddy bear tighter. Lee's heart ached at the sight. She lowered her voice and asked softly, Are you okay? This time the girl looked up, her lips quivering, and whispered a word so quietly it almost got lost in the wind. Help, Lee froze. It was barely a whisper, but she heard it. She gave a quick glance toward Daniels, who immediately caught her eye. No words were needed. He knew. Daniels turned back to the man, keeping his expression calm. I'm going to have you wait right here for a moment, he said, pretending to check something on his radio. The man shifted uncomfortably. Is there a problem, officer? Not at all, Daniels replied smoothly. Just need to confirm something about your registration. He stepped aside and spoke quietly into his radio, calling in the man's license information. His fingers tapped the radio mic anxiously. It felt like forever before dispatch finally replied. When he heard the response, his stomach dropped. The voice on the other end said the name matched a man recently listed in an ongoing alert. Someone wanted for questioning in connection with a missing child case 2 towns over. The details were vague, but the age, description, and even the car model matched almost perfectly. Daniels felt his heartbeat thunder in his chest. He looked back at the car. The little girl was staring at him now, her eyes wide, silently pleading. He couldn't let the man sense his suspicion yet. One wrong move could make everything spiral. He calmly walked back over, masking the storm of thoughts inside his head. Sir, he said casually, I need to check something in the back of your vehicle. Do you mind stepping to the rear with me? The man hesitated, glancing at the car. Why, what's this about? Just procedure, Daniels said with a practiced smile. Slowly, the man followed him toward the back of the car. Daniels' hand hovered near his holster, not because he wanted to use it, but because he didn't know what might happen next. He spoke softly into his shoulder mic, alerting his partner of the situation. Lee gave a faint nod, standing closer to the child's side, ready to act if needed. The man looked restless, shifting from one foot to the other. Sweat glistened on his forehead despite the mild afternoon weather. Can we hurry this up? He muttered. Of course, Daniels said. He opened the trunk halfway, pretending to inspect it while keeping an eye on the man's movements. His mind was racing with possibilities. How to handle this without scaring the child. How to keep control until backup arrived. A minute later, he heard the distant sound of another patrol car approaching. Relief washed over him. He closed the trunk and turned toward the man. All right, sir. Just one more moment. The man's jaw tightened. Am I under arrest or something? Not yet, Daniels said, maintaining a calm, steady tone. We just need to clear up a few details. The man took a step back, his eyes darting toward the car again. Daniels could see the panic building in him. That was when backup finally pulled in, another 2 officers stepping out quickly. Daniels felt his breath ease. He had managed to keep the situation stable, at least for now. But his thoughts were still fixed on the little girl in the back seat. He didn't know who she was, but he knew she needed help. As he stood there watching the scene unfold, a strange chill ran down his spine. Something told him that what started as a routine traffic stop was about to turn into something far more serious. Something that would stay with him for the rest of his life. And in that quiet stretch of road, under the fading afternoon light, Officer Daniels realized that sometimes the smallest thing, a nervous driver, a frightened glance, a child's whisper could change everything. The air felt heavier now. The quiet road that once seemed calm was filled with tension. Officer Daniels stood near the back of the blue sedan, his eyes fixed on the man who had just been pulled over. The man kept asking questions, his voice tight and defensive, but Daniels didn't answer. He was waiting for the backup officers to take their positions quietly. A few yards away, Officer Lee stayed near the passenger side, watching the little girl through the window. The girl hadn't moved much. She sat there holding her small teddy bear close, her eyes darting between the driver and the police. Her lips trembled as if she wanted to say something but was too scared to speak. Daniels took a slow breath. "Sir," he said evenly, "I need to clarify a few things about your vehicle information. Could you please step over to the front of my car while we sort it out?" The man hesitated, looking at the officers gathering behind him. "This is ridiculous," he muttered. "I didn't do anything wrong. I understand," Daniels replied softly. "Just routine. Won't take long." There was a long pause before the man finally nodded and walked toward the patrol car. Daniels followed closely, careful not to break eye contact. He'd been in the force long enough to know when someone was about to run or fight. The man's body language screamed panic. His hands twitched. His breathing was uneven. At the same time, Lee leaned closer to the car window and tried again. "Sweetheart," she said quietly, "do you know where you are?" The girl looked up, her eyes welling up with tears. She shook her head slowly. "Do you know the man driving?" Lee asked gently. This time the girl bit her lip and whispered, "He said I can't talk." Lee's heart sank. She smiled softly, trying to comfort her. "You can talk to me, okay? You're safe now." The girl hesitated for a long moment before saying, "I want my mom." Those 4 words were all Lee needed to hear. She stepped back from the car and met Daniel's eyes across the road. One look was enough. They both knew what that meant. Daniel straightened his back and nodded slightly to the other officers. It was time to take action. "Sir," he said carefully, "I'm going to ask you to place your hands on the hood of the vehicle for me." The man froze. "What? Why?" "Just for safety reasons," Daniel said calmly. "We're checking on something." The man's voice rose. "This is insane."
"I told you I didn't do anything!"
"Sir," Daniel said more firmly, "hands on the hood, please." For a moment, the man looked like he might argue again, but then, with a frustrated sigh, he placed his palms flat on the patrol car. Daniels nodded to one of the backup officers to keep an eye on him, while he walked back toward the blue sedan. When he reached the car, he opened the back door gently. The girl shrank back at first, clutching her teddy bear tighter. Daniels knelt down to her level, his voice soft and steady. "Hey there. It's okay. You don't have to be scared. We're here to help you." She blinked up at him, her eyes full of confusion and fear. "Am I in trouble?" she asked in a shaky voice. Daniels shook his head. "No, sweetheart. Not at all. You're not in trouble. You're safe now." He noticed that her clothes looked rumpled and her shoes didn't match. One sneaker was white, the other pink. That detail hit him hard. Kids didn't dress like that unless they had left home in a hurry. He glanced over his shoulder and saw Officer Lee talking quietly into her radio. She was giving dispatch the little girl's description, checking it against the missing child report they had just received. Daniels could feel his heart pounding as he waited. Then the radio crackled. The dispatcher's voice came through. "Confirmed. The child's description matches the missing person report from Fairview. 7 years old. Name withheld for privacy. Last seen 2 days ago." Daniel's stomach dropped. He looked back at the girl. Her small face, her frightened eyes, it all made sense now. This wasn't just a traffic stop. This was a rescue. He stood up and walked toward the man who was now visibly nervous. "Sir," Daniel said, his voice steady but firm, "you're going to need to stay right where you are." "What's going on?" The man snapped. "You can't just hold me here." Daniels kept his tone professional. "We've received some information that requires clarification. You'll have a chance to explain everything, but right now we need you to remain calm." The man's jaw tightened. His eyes darted toward the girl in the car. That one glance told Daniels everything. This man knew he was caught. "Officer," Lee called out quietly. "We need to separate them now." Daniels nodded. "Take her to the other vehicle," he instructed. Lee moved carefully, helping the girl step out of the car. The little one clung to her teddy bear as Lee guided her to the patrol car. She was trembling, her eyes wide. But when Lee smiled and told her everything would be okay, she gave a tiny nod. As soon as the man saw her being led away, His calm act crumbled. "Hey, where are you taking her?" he shouted, taking a step forward. Daniels raised a hand. "Sir, I need you to stay back." The man's face twisted with anger. "You don't understand. She's my—" "Enough," Daniels said firmly. "We'll discuss that at the station." The man opened his mouth again, but before he could speak, another patrol car pulled up, this time with a senior officer inside. The situation was under control. Daniels felt a wave of relief, though his pulse was still racing. The man was placed in the back of a patrol car for questioning, while Daniels walked over to check on the little girl. She sat quietly in the back seat, staring down at her teddy bear. When he opened the door, she looked up at him. "Are you going to find my mom?" she asked softly. Daniels' throat tightened. "Yes, we are," he said. "We're already looking for her." "You're going to see her very soon." She gave a small nod but didn't smile. It was as if she didn't believe it yet. A few minutes later, the senior officer approached Daniels. "We've confirmed," he said quietly. "The girl is the one reported missing from Fairview. The man's story doesn't match up. He's being taken in for questioning now." Daniels exhaled slowly, running a hand over his face. "Thank God we stopped him," he murmured. The senior officer nodded. "Good instincts. Most people would have let that car pass." Daniels didn't answer. He just looked over at the little girl again, sitting small and fragile in the back seat. For all his years on the force, this was the first time he had seen something like this up close. A real moment where a small decision had made all the difference. They waited there for almost an hour while detectives arrived. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. The road was quiet again, but for Daniels it didn't feel peaceful anymore. Every sound, the soft hum of the wind, the distant chirp of crickets, seemed sharper. When the detectives arrived, they took over the scene. The little girl was checked by a paramedic who spoke gently and offered her some water. She seemed okay, just shaken and tired. Daniel stood nearby, watching silently. He didn't want to leave until he was sure she was safe. At one point, she turned toward him and whispered, "Thank you." Those two words hit him harder than anything else that day. He felt a lump in his throat. "You're welcome," he said quietly. "You're very brave." She gave a tiny nod and went back to hugging her teddy bear. Later that night, after all the paperwork and reports were done, Daniel sat alone in his patrol car. The sky was dark now, the stars faint against the horizon. His coffee from earlier had gone completely cold, but he didn't care. He was still thinking about that moment, the look on the girl's face when he first saw her through the window. It wasn't luck that made him stop that car. It was instinct. Something inside him had told him to look closer, to trust that uneasy feeling. He had learned long ago that in this job, instincts often meant the difference between a normal day and something life-changing. He thought about how easily things could have gone differently. If he'd ignored that tiny flicker of doubt, the car would have kept driving, and that little girl might have stayed lost. As the clock on his dashboard ticked past midnight, Daniels finally turned the key in the ignition. The engine hummed softly. He took one last look at the empty road ahead, feeling a strange mix of exhaustion and gratitude. Tomorrow, he knew, the news would probably talk about it. Officer rescues missing child during traffic stop. People would call him a hero. But he didn't feel like one. He was just doing his job. Still, deep down, he couldn't deny the quiet warmth that spread through his chest. Somewhere tonight, a mother would be sleeping with peace in her heart again, because her little girl was safe. And as he drove off into the night, the faint image of the girl's small face, frightened at first, then full of hope, stayed with him. It reminded him why he wore the badge in the first place. Not for praise, not for power, but for moments like this when doing the right thing could change a life forever. The road stretched ahead under the soft glow of the streetlights. The night felt calm again, but Daniels knew he'd never forget this day. Sometimes fate speaks in whispers, and if you listen closely, it can lead you exactly where you're meant to be. The station was quieter than usual that night. The hum of the overhead lights mixed with the faint sound of a coffee machine sputtering in the corner. Officer Daniels sat at his desk, still in uniform, filling out the last few lines of his report. His hands were tired, but his mind wouldn't stop replaying what had happened on that highway. The man hesitated just a second too long before answering. "Just heading to visit some family," he said quickly. Daniels nodded slowly, pretending to jot something down. "What's your niece's name again?" he asked casually, recalling that the man had said the girl was his niece earlier. The man looked startled for half a second, then forced a quick smile. Her name's Lily." Daniels didn't respond right away. He looked toward the girl, who was still hugging the stuffed toy, and called out softly, "Hey, sweetheart, is your name Lily?" The girl froze. Her little hands tightened around the toy. She didn't say anything, just looked down at her knees. The man quickly interrupted. "She's shy, doesn't talk much around strangers." But that didn't convince Daniels. His gut told him this wasn't just a shy child. There was fear in her silence, not shyness. Officer Lee, who had been standing nearby, gave a small nod to Daniels. It was their unspoken signal that they were both thinking the same thing. Daniels decided to take the next step carefully. He asked the man to step behind the car, saying he needed to check the vehicle registration in more detail. The man obeyed, but he seemed nervous. His eyes kept flicking back toward the car, and his hands trembled slightly. Meanwhile, Lee quietly moved closer to the girl's side of the car. She lowered her voice so the man couldn't hear. "Hey there, sweetie. You okay?" The girl looked up, her eyes watery, and whispered something that made Lee's heart sink. "I want to go home." Lee leaned in slightly, keeping her tone gentle. "Where's home, honey?" The girl shook her head quickly, glancing toward the man who was standing a few feet away. "He said not to tell," she whispered. That was enough. Lee stepped back, her heart pounding. She gave Daniels another subtle look, one that said, "We have to check him now." Daniels walked back to his patrol car and quietly called into the station. He spoke slowly, trying not to draw attention from the man watching him. He asked the dispatcher to run the driver's name through the system. Seconds felt like minutes as he waited. The air seemed still, and even the sound of cars in the distance felt far away. Then the radio crackled softly. The dispatcher's voice came through. "Copy that, Daniels. The driver is flagged for questioning. Possible connection to a missing child report issued 2 towns over." Daniels froze. His chest tightened. He turned slowly to look at the man standing by the car. The man forced a nervous smile, pretending to adjust his jacket. But his hands shook. Daniels took a deep breath and kept his voice steady. "Sir, can you step behind the vehicle with me? I just need to verify something with the license plate." The man hesitated, then followed. Daniels tried to keep things calm. His partner stayed near the car, ready for anything. Then backup arrived quietly, 2 more patrol cars pulling up behind them. The man turned his head slightly, noticing the flashing lights approaching. That was when his face changed. Panic flickered in his eyes. "Is there a problem, officer?" he asked, trying to sound calm, but his voice cracked. Daniels looked straight at him. "Yes, sir," he said firmly. "We need to talk about the little girl." Before the man could react, one of the backup officers moved closer. Daniels reached out carefully, keeping control of the situation. The man took a step back, but within seconds the officers had him safely detained. There was no fight, just silence. A silence filled with relief, fear, and confusion all at once. The girl inside the car watched everything with wide eyes. When the officers opened the door, she didn't move at first. She just stared, as if she couldn't believe what was happening. Lee crouched down beside her and spoke softly. "It's okay now, sweetheart. You're safe." The girl blinked, tears welling in her eyes. Then suddenly, she dropped the stuffed bear, covered her face, and began to cry. Deep, heartbreaking sobs that filled the quiet road. Daniels stood there, feeling his chest tighten. He had seen a lot in his years on duty, but this moment hit differently. He knelt beside her and said gently, "You did good, kiddo. You're safe now." She looked up at him through tears and said in a shaky voice, "He told me my mommy didn't want me anymore." Daniel's heart broke hearing that. "That's not true," he said softly. "Your mommy's been looking for you. She never stopped." The little girl clung to Lee, who held her close, whispering comforting words. It took a few minutes for her sobs to quiet down. Soon, the backup officers began talking with dispatch to confirm details. The missing child report matched exactly. Age, description, even the small scar on her wrist. Everything lined up. When the truth came through the radio, Daniels felt his throat tighten. This wasn't just a lucky traffic stop. This was fate. If he hadn't pulled over that car at that exact time, that girl might have been lost for much longer. A few hours later, after everything was secured and the man was taken into custody, Daniel sat back in his patrol car, watching the girl sitting with Lee near the edge of the road. She was calmer now, sipping from a water bottle, still holding her stuffed bear tightly. A small smile crept onto Daniel's face, a mix of relief and quiet pride. He had trusted his instincts, and it had led to something good, something real. The sky had started to turn orange as the sun began to set. The air was cool, the sound of crickets slowly filling the background. The girl looked up at him and gave a small, tired smile. It was faint, but it was there. Daniels nodded to her gently. "You're going home soon," he said softly. The girl looked down at her bear and whispered, "Thank you." It was a simple word, but it carried more weight than anything else that day. Later that night, back at the station, Daniels filled out the report. Each word reminded him of the look on her face when she said she wanted to go home. He knew he would never forget that moment. He leaned back in his chair, staring at the report's final line. Child, located, and safe. That was the sentence that made everything worth it. When he finally left the station, the town was quiet. The streets were calm again, but inside, Daniels knew he'd carry that day with him for the rest of his life. Sometimes a simple decision, a routine traffic stop, could change everything. And as he drove home that night, he realized something important. Life has a strange way of putting people in the right place at the right time. Maybe it wasn't just a coincidence. Maybe it was meant to be. The image of that little girl's smile stayed with him, a quiet reminder of why he had chosen this job in the first place. Not for authority, not for recognition, but to protect the innocent, even when they couldn't speak for themselves. As the night stretched on and the lights of the city glowed in the distance, Daniels whispered to himself, "Sometimes the smallest sign can save a life." And he knew, deep down, that was the truth. The night was calm when Officer Daniels finally stepped out of the station. The air carried the faint scent of rain, and the streets glowed under the streetlights. His body felt tired, but his mind was still running. The events of the day replayed in slow motion. The moment he saw the little girl's eyes in the back seat, the fear in her voice, the relief when she realized she was safe. Some moments in life stay with you forever, and this was one of them. He sat in his patrol car for a while before starting the engine. He didn't feel like going home yet. Sometimes after a long day, he liked to drive through the quiet parts of town to clear his head, but tonight felt different. He wasn't just a cop finishing his shift. He was a man who had seen something that shook him and reminded him why he wore the badge in the first place. Inside the station, his partner, Officer Lee, was still talking to the child services officer. The little girl was sitting on a bench, wrapped in a blanket, holding her worn-out stuffed bear. Her eyes looked tired, but there was a small spark of peace now, something that hadn't been there before. Daniels walked over quietly, not wanting to startle her. "Hey, kiddo," he said softly. She looked up, blinking slowly, then gave him a small smile. "Hi," she whispered. He crouched down to her level. "You doing okay?" She nodded faintly. "They said my mommy's coming," she said in a voice so soft it almost broke him. "That's right," Daniel said, smiling gently. "She's been looking for you. She never stopped." The girl held her stuffed bear tighter and whispered, "I thought she forgot me." Daniel shook his head. "No, not for a second." For a moment, she just stared at him with those big, tired eyes. Then she said quietly, "Thank you for finding me." Those words hit deeper than she could ever know. Daniels felt his throat tighten, and he had to look away for a second to steady himself. He patted her shoulder softly and said, "You're safe now. That's all that matters." A few minutes later, a woman rushed into the station. Her face was pale, her hair a little messy, and her eyes were red from crying. She looked around desperately until she saw the little girl. "Sweetheart," she cried out, running forward. Across the room, Officer Lee was speaking softly with one of the detectives. They were reviewing the girl's statement. Every now and then, Daniels would catch a glimpse of her small figure sitting in the corner, wrapped in a warm police blanket, holding the same teddy bear from the car. She looked calmer now, but her eyes still held that faraway look, the kind that only comes after fear. Daniels leaned back in his chair and rubbed his eyes. He had been through plenty of tough days on the job, but something about this one had hit him differently. Maybe it was because he had seen that look before in other kids, other faces, but it never got easier. "Any updates?" he asked as Lee walked over. "Yeah," she said, keeping her voice low. "The detectives confirmed everything. The girl's name is being withheld publicly, but she's the one from the missing report out of Fairview. Her mom's on her way here right now." Daniels nodded slowly. "That's good," Lee sighed. "It's a miracle, really. 2 more hours and they might have crossed the state line. If you hadn't stopped that car—" Daniels didn't say anything. He just looked at the girl again. She was sitting next to one of the female officers now, drawing something on a piece of paper with crayons they kept in a drawer for kids who came in scared. The teddy bear sat beside her on the table, its one ear still missing, its fur worn from years of hugs. She was drawing a house, a small one with a roof and a tree beside it. Underneath, she had drawn 2 stick figures holding hands. Daniels felt something twist inside him. "Do we know what happened yet?" he asked quietly. Lee shook her head. "Not the full story. The man isn't talking much. He keeps saying it was all a misunderstanding, but the detectives already found enough to prove otherwise." Daniels exhaled slowly. "I just hope she's okay." "You can tell she's been through a lot," Lee nodded. "She will be. She's strong." For a few moments, neither of them spoke. The sound of typing and distant voices filled the room. It was getting late, but nobody seemed ready to go home yet. Cases like this didn't happen every day, and everyone wanted to make sure things ended right. After a while, Daniels got up and walked over to the girl. He crouched down beside her and smiled softly. "That's a nice drawing," he said. She looked up shyly. "It's my home," she said in a small voice. "That's me and my mom," he nodded. "It's beautiful. Your mom's going to love it. Do you think she'll come soon?" the girl asked, her eyes wide. "Yes," he said, smiling gently. "She's on her way. You'll see her very soon." The girl smiled faintly, though it was the kind of smile that still carried sadness behind it. She looked back down at her drawing and started coloring the tree with a green crayon. Daniel stayed beside her for a few minutes, just keeping her company. He didn't ask questions. Sometimes silence was the best comfort you could offer. About half an hour later, the sound of hurried footsteps echoed down the hallway. Everyone looked up as a woman ran through the door, her face pale and her eyes red from crying. The girl turned her head and froze. For a moment, neither moved. Then the woman whispered her daughter's name, and the girl dropped her crayon and ran. She threw herself into her mother's arms, sobbing uncontrollably. The woman knelt on the floor, holding her tight, crying into her hair. "I've got you," she whispered over and over. "You're safe now. I've got you." The whole room went quiet. Even the detectives stopped typing. There was something sacred about that moment, a reunion that words couldn't describe. Daniels felt his throat tighten as he watched. He'd seen a lot in his career, accidents, losses, arrests, but this was the kind of moment that reminded him why the hard days were worth it. After a while, the mother looked up, tears streaming down her cheeks. She whispered a shaky thank you to everyone in the room, her voice breaking. Daniels nodded, not trusting himself to speak. Once things settled, the detectives led the mother to a quieter room so she could answer a few questions and fill out some forms. The girl stayed close to her, holding her hand tightly, afraid to let go. Daniels went back to his desk, but he couldn't focus on his paperwork anymore. His thoughts kept drifting back to that scene. The fear in the girl's eyes, the way she whispered for help, and the relief when she saw her mother again. Lee walked over with 2 cups of coffee. "You look like you need this," she said, setting one down in front of him. He smiled faintly. "Thanks, I think I'm running on fumes." She sat beside him. "You know," she said, "we spend so much time dealing with the bad side of people that it's easy to forget how much good can come out of what we do. Tonight was one of those nights that'll stick with me for a long time." He nodded slowly. "Yeah, same here." They sat in silence for a few moments, sipping their coffee. The warmth helped, but the exhaustion still lingered. It wasn't physical tiredness, and it was emotional. the kind that came from carrying other people's pain, even if just for a little while. A few hours later, the paperwork was done. The detectives had all the information they needed. The girl and her mother were escorted to a small room to rest before they'd be taken home. Daniels went to check on them one last time. He knocked softly before entering. The little girl was fast asleep on a small couch, her teddy bear tucked under her arm. Her mother sat beside her, gently brushing her hair away from her face. She looked up when Daniels stepped in. "I don't even know how to thank you," she whispered. "I thought I'd never see her again." Daniels shook his head. "You don't need to thank me, ma'am. I'm just glad she's safe." Tears filled her eyes again. "You don't understand. For 2 days I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat. I just kept praying someone would find her. And then you did." Daniels smiled softly. "You prayed. And I guess someone was listening." She nodded slowly, her hand still resting on her daughter's shoulder. "I'll never forget this," she said. "You saved my whole world." Daniels didn't know what to say. He just nodded once and stepped back quietly, giving them space. As he closed the door behind him, he took a deep breath. The air outside the room felt cooler, lighter somehow. By the time he finally left the station, the sun was starting to rise. The sky was a soft mix of orange and gold, the kind of morning light that made everything feel new again. He walked toward his car, the cool breeze brushing against his face. The world around him was waking up, birds chirping, cars starting, people heading to work, and yet, for him it felt like the end of a long emotional night. As he sat in his car, he stared at the steering wheel for a while, lost in thought. His reflection in the rearview mirror showed a tired face, but behind that exhaustion was something else, quiet pride. He thought about all the things that could have gone differently. What if he hadn't noticed that blue sedan? What if he'd ignored the feeling that something was wrong? It would have been just another ordinary day, another patrol shift that came and went without meaning. But because he listened to that instinct, a child was home again, safe in her mother's arms. He turned the key and started the engine. The radio came to life with soft morning music, and for the first time in hours, he felt at peace. As he drove down the empty road, the rising sun casting long shadows across the pavement, Daniels realized something. Sometimes, being a hero doesn't come with grand gestures or medals. Sometimes it's about noticing the little things, trusting your gut, and doing the right thing even when no one's watching. He smiled faintly to himself as the road stretched ahead. The world was still full of people who needed help, moments waiting to unfold, lives waiting to be touched. He knew this wasn't the last time he'd face a difficult situation, but this story, would stay with him forever. And somewhere far away in a small house with a tree beside it, a little girl was waking up safe in her bed, her teddy bear by her side, her mother smiling through tears of relief. For Daniels, that was enough. That was everything. The air around the patrol car felt heavy as the two officers stood there trying to stay calm while their minds raced. Everything about that moment felt tense. The quiet road, the distant sound of tires against the pavement, the faint hum of the car engine still running. The man they had stopped stood a few feet away pretending to be calm, but something in his eyes made both officers uneasy. The girl sat quietly in the back seat, clutching her small stuffed bear. Her face was pale, her lips trembling, and her eyes darted between the officers and the man who had been driving. She looked tired, like she hadn't slept in days. Every so often she glanced toward the road as if waiting for someone to come for her. Officer Daniels, who had done traffic stops for years, couldn't shake the feeling that something was very wrong. He had stopped hundreds of cars, but nothing had ever felt quite like this. The girl's quiet eyes seemed to hold a story that words couldn't tell. He tried to focus on what he could control. He kept his voice even as he asked the driver more questions. "Where did you say you were heading again?"